Welcome to the Voces podcast. I am Luis Ortiz. In today's episode, we talk about Brazil. But before we get to it, it was commencement season in the US, so we want to congratulate the students and faculty and a special recognition to the McCord School of Public Policy of Georgetown University, which sponsored the creation of this podcast. Now, back to business. Brazil, a country with a population of over 211 million people, is quickly becoming a country with one of the highest numbers of COVID 19 infections in the world. As of May 22, Brazil registered 300,000 cases and over 19,000 deaths. The different views of how to handle the pandemic has sent Brazil in a political turmoil, which has resulted in a clash between Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro and state and local authorities who refuse to accept Bolsonaro's demands to keep business as usual while the number of infections have skyrocketed. Brazil's president has also cultivated opposition within his own cabinet, due in part to a chaotic response to the pandemic, but also because his lack of transparency and a complete mismanagement of government. Since the beginning of the pandemic, two health ministers have resigned, and the controversial Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro, have also resigned, accusing Bolsonaro of improper conduct. To have some light on Brazil's politics, in today's episode we hear from Kennedy Alencar. He's a journalist with over 20 years of experience covering Brazilian politics, and he is currently the Washington, D.C. correspondent for CBN. With Kennedy Alencar, we talk about Bolsonaro, his governance style, but we also talk about Lula da Silva, the former president of Brazil, who continues to be a prominent figure in Brazilian politics. And we hear about some of the scenarios that await the biggest economy in Latin America. Here is the interview. Kennedy Alencar, bom dia para você. Thanks for being with us in the podcast.
Hi, Luis. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Kennedy, most of the world is beginning to debate about when to reopen their economies and to ease lockdown measures. Brazil has not even been able to decide on a countrywide quarantine policy. Jair Bolsonaro continues to not just to downplay the risks of the pandemic, but to actually persuade people to come out of their homes and to continue with their regular lives. Now, Bolsonaro has also faced opposition from various governors and Congress even, which have opted for social distancing measures. But at the same time, it seems that a great part of the country thinks that he's managing the situation in the right way. The latest poll from Datafolha shows that 33% of Brazilians agree with Bolsonaro's management of the pandemic, and 39% disagree with him. So, to start this, can you illustrate what is the political scenario on Brazil's struggle with the pandemic at this moment?
Luis, we have in Brazil something similar to what's happening here in the United States. But in Brazil, it's worse because the president there, Bolsonaro, is mining the job of the governors and the mayors to do a proper quarantine. And Bolsonaro is wasting Brazilian time, Brazil's time, to prepare for COVID-19 peak, which is beginning now, to happen in Brazil. The cases are growing now faster than they were some weeks ago. So we have a scenario in Brazil similar to the United States. Governors trying to do a quarantine, trying to keep people at home, and Bolsonaro is all the time talking against it. He never supported this public policy. He defends that kind of theory that you should let people contract the virus to get the immunity, which is a very controversial scientific theory. And Bolsonaro is taking advantage of the inequality in Brazil. Of course, a lot of poor people, they don't have the measures, the possibility to do a quarantine as the middle class, as the rich in Brazil can do. So, they are stuck at home. They have no food. They lost their jobs. Of course, they are eager to start to work again. And if you have a president that is all the time saying to them they should go to work, they shouldn't be at home, this combination of part of the population that believes Bolsonaro, because you have a part of the population, around 25%, 30%, that's conservative, and you have part of the poor, without way out. They don't have they don't see what can they do, to fight against the virus, because they have to fight first for the food, for the money to pay the bills. So Bolsonaro is taking advantage of the despair of the Brazilian people.
Uh, Kennedy, a lot has been said about Bolsonaro's personality and character. I mean, his conservative views have always been accompanied by erratic and, in my view, homophobic and racist comments. But at the same time, he managed to tap on people's frustrations and navigated a chaotic political scenario which led him to the presidency of Brazil. Now, you have met Bolsonaro in person several times and you covered him for over 20 years when he was in Congress, and you also interviewed him as a presidential candidate. Are you surprised of his governance style as president?
No, I'm not surprised at all. Bolsonaro never hidden what he is. Bolsonaro always was very transparent about his ideas. He defends tortures. He's a guy. He's a politician. Was against the minorities.
What do you mean when you said that he defended tortures?
He's a supporter of the dictatorship we have in Brazil in 1964, and there is one torturer very known in Brazil, Colonel Ustra. And when Bolsonaro voted for Dilma's impeachment in 2016, he said he was voting for Ustra. So Bolsonaro is a guy that defends autocracy, dictatorships. He speaks against minorities. He's homophobic, as you said. He's racist. He was a very bad congressman, not anything special, not an important project was presented by Bolsonaro. He was just making speeches, defending wages, rising the wages for the military. So it's a not Bolsonaro is not surprising me at all as a president. He is really delivering what he is. Extreme rightist politician, very ignorant, but he has a kind of method. He learned from Steve Bannon tactics when his son Eduardo Bolsonaro came to Washington to talk to Steve Bannon about political and electoral strategies. So he tries to copy Trump's strategies, but he's worse than Trump.
What was his support that led him to the presidency, and what is his support based on now, which, even though his approval ratings have been decreasing, he remains a president that is, I would say, even highly popular after everything that he has said and what he's doing?
Bolsonaro took advantage of the demonization of politics in Brazil. The car wash operation discovered a lot of corruption in Brazil. That's a fact. But also, car wash took measures that were against the judicial system. Is a kind of corruption of the judicial system, persecution against the Workers' Party, especially against Lula. Not the same weight for investigations against politicians. So the discredit of politics combined with car wash revelations and the Brazilian media trying to normalize Bolsonaro, saying that Bolsonaro and the PT, the Workers' Party, were the different sides of the same coin, helped Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was normalized by Brazilian media during the election in 2018. He made an alliance with part of car wash members. Sergio Moro, his former Minister of Justice, was the judge, the main star of car wash operation, and Moro was in Bolsonaro's cabinet for 16 months.
And
He
Moro is
just
the one that ordered Lula to be jailed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Moro as a judge in Paraná ordered Lula to be jailed, and then when Bolsonaro was elected, he got the Minister of Justice.
It's almost impossible to talk about Brazilian politics without referring to Lula. I mean, he was president for 7 years. By the time Lula ended his presidency, Brazil became the fifth largest economy in the world, ahead of the UK and France. Millions of Brazilians were lifted out of poverty, and Lula was able to transfer his popularity to Dilma Rousseff, who became the new president of Brazil in 2011. Then 2014 came with this car wash case, allegations of corruption, and then next thing you know, Lula is in jail in 2018. You sat down with Lula last year. You interviewed Lula while he was in jail, and you asked him some tough questions on the corruption allegations against him. What is your take on that? Is he a victim of unfair persecution, or he just simply lost control of his government and it was just a matter of time for the truth to be uncovered?
I think he was a victim of Moro, and he was unfairly prosecuted by Moro and by car wash. Lula made mistakes, and of course there was corruption in his government. But you have to take on account that Lula gave freedom to the federal police. Lula appointed a very independent general attorney, and Lula took a lot of measures to fight corruption in Brazil. So the PT was caught by measures and transformations that they implemented as a party ruling Brazil. The allegations against Lula, the proofs against Lula, are very weak. So you have very weak evidences of Lula's direct participation in corruption, and that's why I think he was unfairly prosecuted and sent to jail. Lula made an alliance with the right center in the Congress. It was difficult to rule a country like Brazil. It's so many interests. You have a lot of parties in Brazil. You have to make an alliance to have majority in the Congress. So that was not easy.
How many parties do you have in Congress?
In Congress, we have around 30 parties. Mm-hmm. In the country, more than 30. Around 30, they have representation in the Brazilian Congress.
It's hard to believe that there are 30 different ideologies and views on Brazil.
It's a lot of parties, even 20 different ideologies, that's not possible. And so I think car wash had good propositions, had good intentions, but during the application of the law, they break the law. They broke the law. So that's for me, it's not acceptable because, when you have judges and prosecutors breaking the law, you have no democratic state. You have no democracy. You don't have the rule of the law.
What do you think is going to happen now for the next few years with Bolsonaro scrambling alliances in Congress where he's definitely losing support? Can you give us some idea what would be the scenario from a pessimistic and a more optimistic view?
The more optimistic view would be an impeachment of Bolsonaro. While Bolsonaro is in power, Brazil will not be capable of giving a good response to the coronavirus threat. You have a pandemic, the biggest health problem in a century, and we have a president that's making harder the job of the Brazilians, the governors, the mayors, the politicians to fight COVID-19. So for Brazil, it would be good that Bolsonaro would be impeached, or if the general attorney would make a request to the Supreme Court to start to prosecute him. In that case, he could be take out of the government.
Mm-hmm.
The pessimistic scenario for Brazil is that Bolsonaro, in a kind of agreement with the conservative base in the Congress, manages to stay in power until 2022. And then we will have more of the same. We have a president that has no economic program, no social good program. On the contrary, he's destroying Brazilian institutions. So I'm not very optimistic about Brazil because, of course, an impeachment would be difficult for the country. But even an impeachment is better than Bolsonaro remaining in power. And he has committed a lot of crimes of responsibility and common crimes. So the crimes you have, to overthrow Bolsonaro. But the impeachment is also a political matter. You have to have atmosphere in the Congress, that allows the impeachment to happen. And I think we're starting to see the beginning of those conditionings. I think we're starting to see the beginning of those conditions. He's losing support in the public opinion. He's making a lot of mistakes dealing with the coronavirus. The number of cases and deaths are growing in Brazil. Dilma Rousseff combined a political and economic crisis. Bolsonaro is combining a health crisis with a political one and economical crisis also. So three crises simultaneously, three crises at the same time is really hard for a president to deal with and to keep power, I think.
Kennedy Alencar, obrigado. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Luis.